Welcome to Prepping for the Studio. If you're a musician or musical artist that wants to learn more about what goes on, how to prepare, or how to make the most out of your studio session, you're in the right place. Prepping for the Studio. Episode 2. Roy and Brian talk about the importance of pre-production and working on your songs before booking studio time. How do things like arrangement, key, and tempo affect the recording? Also, should you work with a producer? And what does that even look like? They finish up with a discussion of making demos. Thanks for joining. Hello, and welcome back to Prepping for the Studio, podcast for musicians who are new to the studio and who would like to get prepared to understand what goes on and make the most out of their time and money. I'm Roy Silverstein, and I'm here with my co-host, Brian Schubel.
Hey there.
How you doing, Brian?
I'm pretty good.
Excellent. Yes, here we are at Rarefied Recording, my home base in San Diego. And thanks for joining us again, or maybe for the first time. If you didn't hear episode 1, go back, check that one out. That's just a little introduction to who we are and what this podcast is all about. Which, as I mentioned, it's for musicians and band members and singer-songwriters and so forth that are new to the studio and want to learn what goes on and what to expect, how to prepare, and how to make the most of your time and money.
Yeah, save that money.
Yes, and save the heartache and, make the whole process much smoother.
Yeah, low stress.
Yes. So, last episode, we kind of gave you a 50,000-foot view of the recording process. This time, we're going to be diving into what I call step 0 in the ebook version of this whole thing. So if you missed the first one too, if you go to preppingforthestudio.com, you will find a download for free of an ebook that I wrote, which is actually called A Musician's Guide to the Recording Studio. And this podcast is kind of a conversational version of that. So step 0 of the recording process is really like the songwriting and the pre-production and demo, stuff that you would do before you even stepped into the studio itself.
Preparation.
Yeah. It's actually super key.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about last time, I think the number one thing is the song.
Yeah. And the more prepared you are, the more time you can have good studio time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily a songwriting genius at all.
But you can play.
I can play. I've written songs. But, the podcast is not here to tell you how to write a song, per se. There's probably other podcasts about that or other books. Personally, I think, songs are they can be anything. And some people want to write hit songs and they're looking to, kind of be of the moment and the zeitgeist and capture that. And other people are making like pure art. And I think it's all cool.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So I say do whatever you want as far as the songwriting goes. But there are things to keep in mind
yeah.
as it relates to the studio. And one of them is arrangement. And how that comes into play, you got to think kind of sonically. So if you think about sound, it's just vibrations in the air, Low frequencies it's the air vibrating at a kind of low rate, and high frequencies, the air is vibrating at a high rate, and mid frequencies somewhere in between. So what can happen if you have a bunch of sounds, different instruments that occupy the same frequency space?
Yep.
Is you get a phenomenon called frequency masking, where the louder one of those two would kind of dominate, and you wouldn't be able to hear the quieter one as well. So this is how it kind of comes into play as far as arrangement and recording is. You're going to want to think about how the instruments that are happening at any given time are overlapping, and if you put a bunch of stuff in the same frequency space, all happening at the same time, it's going to sound kind of jumbled.
Yeah, cluttered and a mess.
Yeah. Totally. So some of the great songs, like you'll notice, like everything has its moment to like shine. Like there's places, either moments of time or just instruments that occupy the low end or the high end or the mid range, without too much competition. So everything is very clear. So I think it's important to think about that as you're writing your song and what instruments you're going to have in the song and the parts.
Totally.
Yeah. And, these things can change over time. Like you can have a real shift from one instrument to the next, and things can pop in and out.
And you might find also what you thought would work in your pre-production, once you're in the studio, go, it's just not working.
This is true. Yeah, you have to be flexible. This is great time to do a demo, which we'll talk about towards the end of this episode. But demos let you actually hear, what you're getting, and you can actually have a chance to evaluate and then make changes before you even step in the studio, because you don't want to you want to limit there's number of surprises in the studio itself when the clock is ticking.
Yeah. Now, when you talk arrangement, are you thinking also tempo, or is that sort of
that's kind of the next subject?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thinking about instruments. What instruments are playing, because every instrument like has a sort of a range of notes that it can play. So a range of frequencies that it can play, and some are huge. Like piano has a huge range,
fills
right?
a lot of space.
Yeah, like you go from way down the low notes to the very high notes. Something like a violin or something is much more constricted. But yeah, that can be a thing where you'll notice if you're recording and you're trying to fit something like a piano into your production, but you have like big thick guitars in there already, it can actually be difficult for you to really appreciate what the piano is playing, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So think about that sort of thing. Like the piano should, if you want piano, but you've got these other, things that might be competing with it. Maybe the piano part is in a certain part of the piano.
Yeah, a certain register.
Yeah. Where it can actually sit and you can actually hear it.
Yeah. Also, if you were on a piano and you find like a Steinway or a big piano doesn't actually fit, you can always say, hey, well, what about a Rhodes, or what about a Wurlitzer, or what about a synth playing the part that's a little smaller and not quite as huge,
Totally. Yeah. So, you might also think about like classical music, like some of the greatest composers, like they really knew how to use the orchestra, all the different instruments, and they all kind of fit into certain spots. Because you kind of almost have to think of yourself as one of these composers.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah, the other thing, do you have anything else you want to add about arrangement?
Well, it's funny because when you mention arrangement, my mind immediately goes to intro, verse, chorus, intro, verse, chorus.
Oh yeah.
I think of that.
That would be the structure of the song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what? That's very important too. Yeah, you want to make sure that is figured out.
Like you don't want to have a 32-bar intro unless you're a jam band.
Right.
But if you're a pop band or you want to get to the verse,
or get to the chorus,
you want listeners
don't bore us.
Yeah, don't bore us. Get us to the chorus.
Yes, I maybe that should be the first thing. Actually, is the structure of the song. You want that figured out, and that can vary. I mean, obviously, there's the typical verse, chorus, bridge. Verse, chorus, or whatever. There's
solo.
Yeah, don't forget the solo. But yeah, that might tie in with your lyrics, and which we're gonna talk about as well. But yeah, the structure of the song, you want that figured out, and the arrangement. The arrangement kind of affects the recording more, I think, in terms of, like I said, the overlapping frequency thing.
Yeah.
Because engineers can only do so much. Basically they might be forced to sort of EQ out parts of the piano, let's say, that are just like adding a bunch of mud, adding a bunch of, frequencies that are getting in the way of another part. They might just have to kind of...
Yeah, the tuba can't fit in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of mixing is this type of work where you're finding where instruments fit in the big frequency spectrum that we have to listen to, which is essentially 20 hertz, 20,000 hertz for most humans. Most of us lose our top end. I think only children can really hear up to 20,000.
And dogs.
Yeah, and dogs can hear even higher. But yeah, a lot of mixing is actually figuring out like, well, where am I going to push this sound so it has its own space? But if you do some of that work up front, then there's less of the mixer having to like EQ things weird to like make them work and what have you. So yeah, the other thing I was going to mention sort of related to this is actually a comment from Dennis Weinreich. Thank you, Dennis. Who, when I was writing the book, he's a great engineer that's worked with like Queen and all these people in England. He was saying like he often found people trying to cram too many like ideas into one song.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Because, you hear things on records like fun things like backward cymbal swells, telephone effects, like all these like cool little production kind of things. And like you might be tempted to like, I'm going to do all of them, in one song. But it just doesn't make sense always, do things when they add to the meaning of the song, I think, and when there's a place for them to be appreciated, as opposed to just doing something for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, consider when more is more and when less is actually more.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's what I had to say about arrangement and that idea of, don't cram too many things in one. Tempo was the next thing I was going to bring up. I think we talked about it a little bit last time.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah. But it's very important that you find the right tempo for your song so that it doesn't feel sluggish or too fast. You got to experiment with that,
Yeah, if the words are fitting, you don't want the singer to have to try to go too fast where there's no feeling or no vibe.
Yeah, they can't even get the words out and then you can't even understand them. So yeah, tempo, I think every song probably has, a little range where it can work, although you could do a version that's slow, but it's going to have a totally different vibe.
Yeah.
Obviously. So, this is where demos again can help because you might find as you do the demo that this feels way too slow. Or,
yeah. And I think one of the things that I find is bands that write a song and then they're out playing it live. A lot of times the tempo might be too fast because they're excited and they're playing it on stage and the audience is cheering or whatever. Then they come in the studio and it just feels too fast. You might want to step it down a little bit. Unless you've made it work,
right.
At
Yeah.
that fast tempo.
No, that was my experience playing live in a band is we'd all be excited at the show and it would just be way fast. Way fast to the point where sometimes you couldn't even like keep up.
Yeah. That's great.
So yeah, but in the studio situation, you can actually like know what you want, right? You come in with a BPM, a beats per minute, written out and conveyed to your engineer. Like this is what, especially if you're working with a click track, which is a whole other thing that we should talk about too, is whether you should work with the click track. But yeah, having that figured out, and then you actually have a solid timing reference, and you can not be too fast and not be too slow, because you don't really want to try to change those later.
Yep.
Like, what's your experience, Brian? Like
Not
trying
good.
to use
Not good.
audio stretching, and because we have these tools,
Yeah.
in Pro Tools and other programs for stretching things and shrinking them, and
Yeah.
it's quantizing, blah blah blah.
I've had to do it a few times, but usually if you have to go too far, then you start hearing the little audio artifacts.
Yes, exactly.
Weirdness. And then if you do a VSO thing, then the pitch changes. So
Yeah, I mean, so that is the old school way of changing the tempo would be what's called vari speed, which is when everyone worked on tape, like you can change the tape speed. And so that does change the pitch when you do that, but it can be a cool effect. And sometimes that can be cool because it doesn't necessarily like create artifacts like when you try to do this other stuff in Pro Tools or whatever, where where the algorithms try to keep the pitch the same but yet make the timing stretched or shrunk. Like that's where you get these weird audio artifacts.
Yeah.
And you really don't want to go down that path unless
it's rough.
Yeah.
I mean, my suggestion, and I worked with one producer who would do this, is you try different tempos when you're ready to cut the song. You have a tempo, let's say it's 120, which is what everything's default to. You try 120, then try 122, try 118. Just go back and forth and see where it feels the best with the whole band giving input, and generally you'll find it, I think.
Yeah. Like I said, you could do that in a demo. So then you don't have to do that in your recording session when the clock is ticking.
Yeah.
So yeah, the vari speed thing is interesting, but it's kind of an effect, like, but yeah, you want to avoid doing the weird stretching and what have you. Now back to click track for a second. I mean, the great thing about click tracks is, it helps you play very consistent tempo, right? But the bad thing is that it kind of locks you in. It's harder to put in the human push and pull that you might want to do. So you got to think about that for your song. Does it need to have a lot of kind of slowing down here, speeding up there? Like, is that important to you and your song, or is it the type of thing where no, it really needs to be like a robot, and different kinds of music I think kind of fall into different categories there.
Yeah.
So definitely consider that in this stage too, so you kind of know when you get to the session, what you're going to do. Are you going to play to a click, or are you going to maybe just count it off?
Yeah.
So you start at some consistent place at least.
Yeah.
But then let it kind of ebb and flow.
Yeah. And be aware also, if you're playing with a live drummer, if he can play with a click too. Because if he can't play with a click, you may not want to use it because it can cause a lot of trouble.
It's just more trouble than it's worth sometimes. I think in another episode, we're going to go deeper into click tracks. But yeah, they're tricky. And you're going to want to practice if your drummer or in your band, but especially the drummer is not very confident with the click. You're going to want to practice with a click because, man, it can throw people off.
Yeah.
And when you're really on it, it actually is hard to hear the click because
disappears.
Yeah, it kind of like all the snare hits and cover it. They're really, if the snare is on right on certain hits, it's just like, where'd the click go? Oh, it's masked.
Yeah.
Amplitude masking that instead of frequency. But yeah, so it can be tricky to know, am I on or am I off? Because if you're dead on, then you kind of disappears. So it's funny.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other things you'd say about tempo, Brian?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, there's also, and you said we're going to talk more about tempo. So, you can also do the thing where you program different tempos for different sections.
Thanks for mentioning that. I do have that in the ebook. And if you're the type of band that does the kind of mathy thing where, or maybe it's not mathy, but some bands are like all over the place with the tempo changes and the time signature changes, which is the other thing you want to know when you go into your session. Like if you're moving that around a lot, you're going to want to map that out. You're going to want to know where those things change, because especially if you're going to work with the click, you're going to need to be able to communicate that to the engineer on the session, and they can create a tempo map in whatever the program is, where the click track will actually change at the right time to that new time signature or new tempo.
Yeah.
So you really need to know that stuff ahead of time instead of trying to figure it out on the fly. You're going to waste a lot of time.
Totally. And then and then you don't even know if it's going to work if you're doing it on the fly.
Yeah, it can be tricky to program those things. It's kind of weird. Okay, yeah, thanks. That really is important. And I was going to move on to key, which again we talked about a little bit about this in episode 1, the importance of finding the right key for your song. Number 1, because of the vocalist range, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you need to make sure that the singer can actually hit the notes. And
that's important.
Yeah, and again, we have tools that can fix these things, but if your singer is straining to like get to the note, it's going to sound strained.
Yeah.
So they need to be able to get there, even if maybe they're a little off. That's where the auto-tune and Melodyne and these tools that we have can help, Mm-hmm. But if it's way out of range, it's just not going to sound good.
Yeah, just change the key.
Yeah. So finding the right key is important. And then there's certain instruments that just have, certain keys that are difficult to play in.
Mm-hmm.
And so like horns and strings sometimes, you're going to want to think about that and talk to whoever's playing those instruments in the band, or if you're going to hire someone, have a conversation about that sort of thing.
Yep.
So you don't get into a situation where they're like, that's like really difficult to play on this instrument. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I find really fascinating is there's a whole thing about the emotions of different musical keys. Have you ever encountered this?
Oh, I think I've heard about this.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna take a moment to find this website. Here we go. Just do a Google search for like emotions of musical keys, and you'll find various websites that talk about this. And I'll read some of these, and some of them are hilarious. Okay, C major, completely pure. Its character is innocence, simplicity, naivety, children's talk. That makes sense because I've experienced this playing like C major. It's very childlike.
With your son,
yeah, or just back in the day when I was learning piano.
Right.
C minor, declaration of love, and at the same time, the lament of unhappy love. All languishing, longing, sighing of the lovesick soul lies in this key. So this is from some wmitch.edu, Western Michigan. I'm not even sure, but there's so many different websites that have these things. Okay, how about D flat major, a leering key degenerating into grief and rapture. Wow. It cannot laugh, but it can smile. It cannot howl, but it can at least grimace. It's crying. Consequently, only unusual characters and feelings can be brought out in this key.
That's pretty wild.
I don't know how much weight to put onto these things, but I find it really fascinating.
Well, it could inspire you to write a certain type of song in a certain key, if you think about it.
Yeah, if you read through these, D major, the key of triumph, of hallelujahs, of war cries, of victory rejoicing. Thus, the inviting symphonies, the marches, holiday songs, and heaven rejoicing choruses are set in this key. Like, maybe that's true, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's might be reasons to pick certain keys. It's really weird to me that this is the case, but
that's wild.
Yeah, like what is it about? That seems like totally unexplainable to me.
Be interesting to go find a song that has a sort of vibe that you're talking about here and see what key it is and see if it if it lines up.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Yeah, because to me it's like, well, why would this be the case? But there must be something.
Yeah,
if these things are true, and maybe they're not like absolutes, but
I mean, it makes me think of blues. Blues has a very sort of a sound to the key.
Yeah, there's a certain structure to the blues.
Seventh chords and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. And now, a word from our sponsor,
Rarefied Recording.
Oh, that's me. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my studio, Rarefied Recording, and the services I offer there. The studio itself was built from the ground up, from the masterful plans of Mr. Wes Lachaux, so it sounds fantastic both in the control room and the live room. A 32-channel Neve Genesis console holds center court and is complemented by a wide array of outboard gear, instruments, and microphones. Your music will be in good company. If you live in the San Diego area, just head on over to rarefiedrecording.com to learn more and book a tour. You can also hear examples of my tracking and mixing work. If you aren't lucky enough to live in San Diego, let me be the first to suggest the idea of a destination recording experience. San Diego is BBB approved. The Better Business Bureau? No, beaches, burritos, and beer. Even if you're not a beach person, who's to complain with temperatures that are very often in the 70s? Even the winter months are averaging in the mid-60s. And being relatively dry, rain is unlikely to get in your way. The studio is very centrally located, and you can get to just about anywhere in the area in 15 to 20 minutes, even Mexico. And while burritos are technically not a food you find in Mexico itself, San Diego has taken the concept to blissful culinary heights. You can't go hardly 100 yards here without running into a little taco shop that will be 10 times better than whatever options you have in your town. If Mexican isn't your thing, no worries. There are tons of great restaurants in the area, including a barbecue place 3 blocks away that rivals anything I've tried in Texas. And adjacent to it is one of over 150 craft breweries in San Diego. If you love beer, we gotcha. The West Coast IPA style is a specialty here, but we've got brewers doing all kinds of beers, and several have tasting rooms in walking distance. Did I mention that accommodations are available? So head on over to rarefiedrecording.com and reach out for a quote today. That's RAREFIED recording.com. And now back to the episode. Okay, what about lyrics? Super important. Because a lot of people out there, they really listen to lyrics.
Yeah.
I'm not one of them.
I'm probably with you there, Roy. I tend to listen to the groove and get the vibe, but eventually come around to the lyric.
Yeah, they are super important. I think the thing about engineers like you and me is that we're so into the sound of things.
Yeah.
That we're listening more to that than we are to the lyrics. But most people they're listening to the lyrics. I think probably the majority of people. I'm
listening to what do you call it? The rhythm of the lyric.
Right.
What do you call that? It's like there's a word for that, but
the cadence.
The cadence of the lyric is what I'm hearing most of the time, and how that's working with the band. You know. Yes,
it's very important. Yeah, the way that the words, the melody, and the cadence work out. Because it can be tricky sometimes to fit your lyrics into the rhythm of the song. Like you may actually have to modify your lyrics in a way that you wouldn't normally, just so that it comes out where it fits with the rhythm.
There's a pocket.
Yeah.
You gotta find that pocket.
Yeah. So you have to work on those kind of things besides the lyrics themselves, sort of how they work with the melody and the timing of everything.
And pitch.
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. I think, some words can be hard to sing, and give a real note to.
Yeah.
So, when you do your demos, you'll find that out,
Yeah.
So
the other thing I find is that a lot of times singers will have too many filler words. And or where sometimes it doesn't need to be there. You just go right into the word.
I'd say your lyrics should work as poetry. Some of the best lyrics could be just read as poems, and they just work that way because there's not much difference between song lyrics and poetry, really.
It's true.
Yeah. So there's different styles of songs. Some are much more storytelling like, and some are very sort of what does this mean? Abstract. Yeah. Wow. So you get to see what you're going for, but yeah, I think the best lyrics kind of work even just being read as poems.
Totally.
So yeah, there's that. Anything else you can think of for lyrics?
Oh, I know what I would say is I know a lot of people talk about the stories of like different bands and Beatles, and when they have a song in their head but they don't know the lyrics, a lot of times they'll just mumble things or say words like scrambled eggs and bacon and just don't really have the words, but they have the track kind of coming up, and then once they get the track going, then they start thinking, okay, well I've got to put real words in there. So
that is a good method to work on the melody before you have the lyrics. You can just use nonsense words at first.
Or not even words, just sort of grunts and
Oohs and ahs
Yeah,
and lahs and yeah. So then at least, you know, you can work through the rest of the song. You can figure out kind of what you want the melody to be, which is, you know, with the lyric, the top line melody is, again, like probably what most people are really listening to.
Yeah.
So you want both of those to be super strong. And then, then you eventually do need, if you're going to, unless you're doing instrumental music, you do need, you do need lyrics eventually. So you don't want to figure those out in the studio though.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Which, I mean, some famous singers and so forth, I think they have done that because they've had the budget.
Yeah.
Where they've just been like, I'm going to go off and I'm going to write lyrics real quick. You know, maybe that was part of their process of like putting this pressure on themselves at the very end to just write the lyrics like right before they actually have to sing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that wouldn't be suggested.
Yeah.
If you're trying to have a smooth session.
But that shows you they're really trying to come up with something that's important and that means something and not just throw something in there. You know, I've worked with several people where they're like, I just don't have that line yet. And they'll take their time and make sure it fits and sometimes interchange words, you know, just to make it right.
Yeah.
But that's part of the art, you know.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Sonics is what I was going to get into next. So Sonics, now we're getting into less of the songwriting, but more of your vision for how you want the song to sound. So references can be really important here.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Like listening to stuff that you know and you love and thinking about your song and you as a musical artist and, you know, what do you kind of want to sound like? Not that you're going to copy it exactly or anything like that, but you know, what's informing your sound? Is it going to be something aggressive and in your face or subdued and gentle? Is it going to be super roomy and reverby or super dead? You like stuff dark, you like stuff bright, you like stuff really clean and clear or really distorted or somewhere in between. Is there certain eras of music that you really love, 70s, 80s, that they have distinctive sounds?
Yeah, totally.
Now, you worked in the 70s, right?
No,
80s.
80s was my starting point.
Trying to make you older.
Yeah. I used to wish I had because that was really a magical time.
It was kind of an incredible time because analog gear had really gone to this great point. And then 80s things started to shift.
Yeah, new way. A lot of synthesizers.
Yeah, a lot of digital synthesizers.
Digital gear was starting to come into
the beginning of digital gear. Yeah,
and Fairlights and.
Yeah, but the 80s had a particular thing going on there.
Totally, yeah.
Did you work on some very 80s?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you think about gated reverbs on snare drums, you
Mm-hmm.
know that's very 80s. I think of where the Power Station drum sound, that whole era.
Yeah.
Reverb, you know.
Yeah, very big reverbs on the snares.
Yeah.
And the beginning of these digital synthesizers.
David Bowie, the Space Station, all that kind of crazy delay stuff, and flangers and phasers.
Yeah.
It was a time of a lot of experimenting too, although the Beatles did that in the early 70s, 60s.
Right.
But
Peter Gabriel, I mean,
man.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. It sounds dated sometimes now, but it's also there's some interesting sounds in there that you can pull from.
It was also the time of pretty big budgets. I remember when I first started, and we would have a catering service where you would have just a long spread of food just all day long, every day, and we would take a whole day to get a bass drum sound. So.
Yeah.
It was insane. Wow. You'd build tunnels. You'd say no tunnel. Let's put the tunnel back, try a different kit, put different snares up, different toms, different mics, you know, different place in the room. I mean, it was nuts.
Different time. Yeah. So much more money available to make these records. And, you know, those out there listening, you know, you're probably like self-funded, like, you know, and you're just not going to have that luxury of time. But
you could do that when you're pre-production. You know, if your drummer has 3 drum sets, see which one works for what song. If you want to go there, anyway.
Yeah,
or your bass player has like flat wound strings and a hollow body and then
Yeah, exactly.
Try
'Cause
different
all
sounds.
these instruments, they do have subtly different sounds, different drums, different snare drums, different,
That's the,
basses, guitars, amps.
yeah, that's the one thing I still to this day anymore when I go and record a band, it's one snare drum through the whole record. If I'm doing 10 songs, they use the same snare.
Yeah,
Just it's not thought about, but the snare does make a difference on how it's hitting the song and the key of the song and the singer. All of that stuff's so important.
yeah, yeah. So these days, it's harder to find the time to make those changes, I guess.
Yeah, details like that.
Right.
But you can also do things in post that are pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you can basically replace the snare drum with a sample.
Exactly. Yeah.
But, the closer you can get it, if you're coming into a studio, the closer you can get to how you want it, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is something you can think about before you even step in the studio is, do some demos, try out some different sounds. And even if you maybe are using samples, at least you'll find something that like, oh yeah, I really like how this kind of snare hits. Like, is it like a little piccolo snare or is it a big fat wooden snare, metal snare, all these things. And then, there's so many opportunities to figure out exactly what you want and then be able to communicate those things to the engineer ahead of time, ahead of time, because the best thing to do is to have a conversation with whoever's going to be recording you and let them know what the references are and play them demos and
That's really good. Yeah.
and talk about what you're going for so they can make a plan in their head or on paper of what mics they're going to use and where they're going to put them, because all these things influence that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's funny because as you're talking, I'm constantly thinking real drums, but a lot of the work we do too is not real drums, or it's just loops or different things, but there's still other things you can do to treat the song to, let's say you want something really dead and dry for one song, and then the next song is going to be very ambient and reverby. So there's samples and different effects you can do to it so that the engineer has a head start. He already knows what he's going for, rather than you want to do what? Oh, well, let me set that up. There's 30 minutes gone,
Yeah, totally. The more that the engineer knows what's coming at them from the beginning, the more prepared they're going to be and the more likely you're going to get what you want out of it. Definitely think about sonics and communicate those to your engineer ahead of time. Now let's talk about working with a producer, because all these steps of arrangement, all these things we talked about, arrangement and tempo and key, and all these things, you can get help from a producer with all these things if you want. Whether or not you work with a producer is a pretty big decision. I mean, first there's the budget. Can you even afford to hire another person? Now, some producers nowadays, especially more than ever, are engineers too.
Yeah.
So you might be finding someone, if you think you really need help with these things, you might be finding a producer engineer who would kind of play both roles.
Yeah.
But, are they charging for the time that they might be giving you input before you even step in the studio? You have to kind of know.
It's good to draw all those lines out before you. That's the other thing, the business side of it, have that sorted out. That's a whole nother one.
Yeah, at some point we're going to have to talk about budget, because I think one thing I want to add to the ebook is what to do when you're short on budget, where to focus. But yeah, the producer thing, you don't have to work with a producer. And in fact, if you're a new artist, I kind of feel like there's a self-discovery period.
Yeah, totally.
Where it might be better not to work with a producer at the very beginning of your explorations of doing music, because you're figuring yourself out. If you start working with a producer right away, and you don't even know what your vision is, you might not end up where you want to be in the end.
Yeah, and if it's your first time in the studio, there's a lot of eye-opening things that happen.
Yeah. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to start forming your own musical identity, and having some of that before you get a producer involved, I think is probably a good idea. But if you're completely lost and you have no idea what you want to do, then you could make the argument that a producer could be really helpful.
Or have a really good engineer that's experienced, I should say, that can help.
That can help, because when there's no producer, the engineer essentially becomes the de facto producer.
Yeah.
Or whoever is around that has an opinion on the recording session. That's just a matter of course. Like, without anyone else driving the ship and kind of steering things and creating a direction, like, it's the engineer, and it that ends up making all the even like little decisions on what mics to use and where to put them.
Yep.
That end up affecting the sound of the recording. So you gotta keep in mind that when there is no producer, there's de facto producers essentially. Whether that could be yourself or your bandmates too.
Yeah.
But choosing a producer is tricky, because you got to find someone that you gel with. Someone you trust, someone who you respect, and it was the right fit, because there's a lot of different kinds of producers. We were talking about this before we started recording, right? There's producers that are very involved and like basically are like co-songwriters. There's other producers who sit on the couch and hardly say anything until there's like something they love or they hate. In the rap and hip hop world, like, producer usually means the person who's making the beat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's producers who have maybe nothing to do with the songwriting, but they're kind of like a sounding board to the artists and giving them feedback. And some producers play on your session.
Yeah, right.
Some don't. So what it is that you're looking for as far as how much involvement the producer has, I think is important to think about.
And it's kind of dependent on who you are as an artist and what you're looking for. What you would need from a producer, so that would kind of direct you and what type of producer you'd want.
Yeah. Have you done any like production type stuff?
I have, and I usually go with the production where there's somebody in the band who's pretty strong, that they know what they want, but they need a soundboard or some ideas. I don't. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't call myself a producer really, but I have gotten production credit on things because I've been that sounding board for people.
Yeah.
And
that's an important part too. A lot of people think, oh, well, a soundboard, but it's important because you're telling the artist or the band that take was awesome. That was the take.
Yeah.
Believe me, and because you've been sitting in this room for years doing the same thing, you know when you hear a good take.
And experienced engineers, I mean, they've experienced good and bad music.
Yeah.
And so they have their own taste formed by all this.
Yeah.
And you can rely on them to give you some feedback. And sometimes I just have ideas, like something pops in my head. Oh, it'd be cool if you use this pedal, or have you thought about a harmony that goes kind of like this? Or you never know when I just randomly get inspired to have some kind of input like that. And
I think it's good to have. I like having a producer around, because it's good to have somebody in the room who's looking at the overall. He's walking in here in the overall. He's not focused on the vocal, or he's not focused on the kick drum, or he's not focused.
Which is what the engineer typically is.
Yeah.
Typically kind of micro-focused on whatever's being recorded at that moment.
Everybody's kind of got their part, and so the producer is looking over everything. He's also, I mean, I guess it depends on his role, but he's the guy watching the budget, making sure all the pieces are at the studio when they need to be. The band players are out of bed and on their way to the studio on time.
Yes, I mean, session players are hired and they're actually coming and they're getting paid.
And people get paid, and there's a lot of stuff they oversee.
Yeah.
Depending on the producer, once again,
Right. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it is your music, and you have to be the one who is okay with what is being created here because your name's on the record. If the producer really, really hates what you're trying to push, then maybe they weren't the right person. They can bail out, you know?
Right.
Hopefully it won't come to that, but yeah. So,
and you will have disagreements too, and that's healthy, I think, you know, because generally the songwriter or the singer will win out because I think it's their song.
yeah.
But the producer may be pushing to say, no, you can't do that. And, you know, that's for you guys to work out. But expect those times.
Yeah, there will be moments where there's disagreement, and it's important to listen to perspectives. And a lot of people will say, I think, that it's faster usually to just try an idea than it is to argue about it.
That's right. That's a good point. It really is.
To be open to these other ideas and let's just try it.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally.
because sometimes you don't really know until you do.
If you're set up.
Yeah, especially if you're ready to go. Like if it's a super involved, crazy thing, then maybe it's more of a discussion. But if it's not that hard to like try the thing that someone's suggesting, just do it.
Yeah.
Just do it and see what happens. Because otherwise, you could really get in this long like back and forth of why they think it's good, you don't, and like yeah. And a good producer will often go along with you if you have an idea like, I'm gonna try this.
And
hopefully they're game for that. If they're not, then again, maybe you have the wrong person because they're not even willing to try your idea.
I think one of the things I would say, and this is really totally up to everybody, but I wouldn't ask your best friend to be your producer or your soulmate, or I think I'd really look for somebody that's what they do as a job. And, you know, I think you'll get a better soundboard in that respect, especially if they have a lot of experience.
Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
There's nothing wrong with having your best friend being your producer if that's how your relationship works and all that. But I think all in all, it's best to get
someone who's kind of looking out for the music, number one, and the song.
Totally.
And who isn't afraid to maybe tell you something that you don't want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Because you need that kind of honesty if you're going to get the most out of your songs. So yeah, that is good advice. All right, let's talk about making demos. It's, like we've said, it's the chance to actually hash out a lot of these things that we've talked about before you step in the studio on your own time, on your own dime. And it's easier than ever, you know, now that we have GarageBand, for instance, like kind of comes for free on Apple's products, at least. There's a lot of other like free or really cheap recording software you can get. There's pretty dang cheap audio interfaces and microphones that you can get.
Totally. Programs
that aren't too difficult to understand how to use. So there's not much excuse anymore for making demos at home.
That's right.
And the last thing you want to do is make a demo at a actual studio these days, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a kind of a waste of time. It used to be a thing. I mean, it used to be like demo studios.
Sure.
You'd go cut your demos, and it was very important part of like getting a record deal. And they were cheaper studios, and you know, you'd go in there, you'd bang it out, and you'd have something to show for yourself. Yeah. And that was like kind of the only way, more or less, that you could do that. But now,
I used to do that a lot. Off when I wasn't working and there was a room open, they would let us go in and record bands, and so we'd go in and make demos with bands, and that was how we got experience. You know, which is great. But
yeah, I mean, that's basically how I taught myself to record. Is I just was home recording, you know, and doing it for my own projects, and not that I ever then later went into a studio to record it. I was just, it was, you know, we were just put it out on a CDR or whatever. This was before streaming and all that.
Right.
But yeah.
But the idea is just to bash it out, get the ideas down, and move on.
Yeah. And then maybe you do another version. You know, you can do multiple demos. And you don't need fancy equipment to do it. I mean, in worst case, you can do a voice memo on your phone.
Yeah,
At least you get the idea down.
Acoustic guitar or whatever.
Yeah, if the song should work on its most basic instrument, like acoustic guitar or piano, whatever it is.
Or a beat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just singing it. I mean, sometimes people do these voice memos so they can remember a melody or just remember this like basic song that they just came up with, which is a good idea.
Yeah.
But the best songs work even in this very stripped down way, you know.
I have a big word for us, which everybody continues to fight.
Yes.
Demoitis.
Oh, yes. This is mentioned in the book. Yeah.
Is it? Okay. Yep.
Yes. Well, what is demoitis, Brian?
Well, it's where, let's say you have your demo and there's certain things in the demo that you absolutely love because you've been listening to it in your car for months before going into the studio to actually make the master of that song. And you've fallen in love with, it could be a number of things. It could be the way you sang it or played a guitar, or there's a guitar lick or a reverb on the voice, or there's so many different things that you could be attached to.
Yes.
That when it comes time to make it in the studio, you're craving to hear that sound and you're stuck on it. And it really can be hard to get over that barrier.
Yes, I guess this is the dark side of making demos.
Yes.
You can get stuck on how it sounds, and when you go to do the real recording, you're like, that's not like the demo. It's just not right.
Yep.
But it's a bit of a problem to get over that, because you have to be able to let go a little bit of that, because the demo I mean, yes, there might be some aspect of it that's great, but you need to be able to evaluate the new recording on its own merits, and that can take some mind tricks almost.
Yeah.
To like forget about the demo. And
yeah, the only other option is to record the demo like it's a master, but then that means, gear.
Yeah, that's what you're coming to a studio for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's not just the gear; it's the experience.
Yeah,
in the ear. So
yep,
it's hard to do that. But occasionally, I have heard of people flying particular parts in from their demos because they just couldn't get the performance the same, or the sound, or whatever it was.
Yeah,
and so there might be like, as long as it works in the timing wise, but there might be cases where you can actually, if you have an isolated track of the guitar or whatever, you can like bring it into the real recording and just use it.
Yep.
Occasionally this does happen.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
And this is where tempo and pitch can come into play too, because if it's a different key, then you're going to have to
you're going to have to use the tools to change that, which might sound weird. So ideally your demo is done at the right key and the right tempo, so that in this case where you're going to fly something in from your demo into the real recording, it actually works without messing with it.
Yeah. I only laugh at this because it's as a mixer, I'm constantly getting notes, especially with people who have demos that they've lived with for a while. I'm getting notes, and then once I go back and I listen to the demo, I'm like, they just want something that sounds a little bit like that. A lot of times it's a reverb on the voice or an effect on something.
Yeah, which is cool. I mean, go for it. Experiment with those things in your demos, because then that gives you a direction for the tracking or the mixing engineer to do something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, totally.
That's, I think, all we were really planning to talk about this episode.
Wow, these go by really fast.
Quick, yeah. I hope you enjoyed it, and please subscribe to the podcast if you would. We'll be back in episode 3, I guess, jumping into the next step of the process, which would be tracking and how to prepare for tracking. Cool. We'll see how far we get through that section.
Dang, that'll be fun.
Yeah. But thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.
See you guys.
That's our show for today, folks. Thanks so much for listening to Prepping for the Studio. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to your podcast from. And don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends. Episode info and my ebook, A Musician's Guide to the Recording Studio, are available at preppingforthestudio.com. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out there. Prepping for the Studio was recorded and edited at Rarefied Recording by me, Roy Silverstein. Theme music written by myself and Ariel Levine, performed and recorded by Ariel Levine. Many thanks to my co-host Brian Schubel and you. Best of luck to you and your musical endeavors. And remember, as Alexander Graham Bell once said, before anything else, preparation is the key to success. We'll see you next time.